Hello and welcome, dear viewers. Today we will discuss the morphological and anatomical responses of plants to water. Availability of water is a major selective force in the evolution of the plant's ability to respond to moisture stress. Mosses, algae, fungi and lichens have no protective mechanism against water loss because their internal water status tends to match atmospheric moisture conditions. At the condition of water scarcity, their cells shrink without disturbing the fine protoplasmic structures and the vital processes are suppressed. With the improvement of moisture condition, they imbibe water and cells resume normal functioning. Such organisms are called poikilohydric as they restrict their growth to moist periods. Other plants such as ferns and seed plants are able to maintain stable water balance within limits independent of fluctuations of atmospheric moisture levels and are called homohydric. The ability is supported by vacuoles that store water within the cell, a protective cuticle slowing down evaporation, stomata to regulate transpiration, a combination of osmotic pressure and turgor pressure of water within the cells, and the extensive root system. All features of specialization that help plants to grow under different habitats are referred to as ecological adaptations. The term adaptation can be defined as the structural and functional characteristics of the living organisms which develop over a period of time and enable them to survive and reproduce in a particular environment or habitat. It is quite evident that water is an important ecological factor in the life of plants. Tissues of growing plants may contain from 60 to 95% of water by weight. Water is the prime factor responsible for the distribution of vegetation and its structure. Warming 1909 classified the plants on the basis of their water requirement into three ecological groups. They are hydrophytes, xerophytes and mesophytes. Hydrophytes. Hydrophytes are plants that grow in regions where there is plenty of water supply such as lakes, ponds, rivers, streams and marshes or wet soils. The organisms found in aquatic habitats experience a variety of physical factors. These include the availability of oxygen and light, pressure fluctuations, resistance to motion, salt concentration, etc. To adjust to the prevailing conditions, aquatic plants have various types of adaptations. According to the way in which they develop in water, they are divided into the following 5 categories. Number 1. Free-floating hydrophytes. These plants float freely on the surface of water but are not rooted in the mud. These remain in contact with water and air but not soil. Very small such hydrophytes float on the surface of water by their flattened bodies and surface tension of water. The larger plants possess special air storing organs for balancing them over the surface of water. Examples of free floating hydrophytes are Eichhornia, Pistia, Wolffia, Salvinia, Azolla, etc. Number 2. Rooted hydrophytes with floating leaves. These hydrophytes are rooted in mud but their leaves and flowering shoots float on or above the water surface. Such plants usually grow in shallow water and possess elongated and flexible petioles or stem to bring the lamina on the surface of water. Victoria regia, Nelumbo nucifera, Nymphia and Marsilia are some of the examples of rooted hydrophytes with floating leaves. Number 3. Submerged floating hydrophytes. This group of submerged hydrophytes include those plants which are not rooted in mud and remain completely suspended in water body. They neither reach the surface nor are in contact with the bottom. Examples of such plants include nojos, Utricularia, and ceratophyllum. Number 4. Submerged rooted hydrophytes. These plants are completely immersed in water and rooted in the mud. However, the root system is poorly developed and helps in the absorption of some nutrients from the bottom. Examples of such plants are Hydrilla, Vallisneria, Potamogeton pectinatus, Isoetus, etc. Number 5. Rooted emergent hydrophytes or amphibious hydrophytes. This group includes those plants which grow in shallow water with their shoots extending above the surface of water. These plants are rooted in the mud. Their basal parts including roots, rhizomatous stem, basal part of stem, and some leaves may be submerged in water, but the upper part of stem, branches, some leaves, and flowering shoots are exposed to air. These plants show both hydrophytic and mesophytic characters. The aerial parts of these amphibious plants show mesophytic characters, while the submerged parts develop hydrophytic characters. Ranunculus aquaticus, Limnophila heterophylla, Myrophyllum heterophyllum, Typha, and Sagittaria are some of the examples of such plants. Morphological adaptations in hydrophytes. Due to availability of water in plenty, roots, the principal organs of water absorption in hydrophytes, become of secondary importance and less significant. Their overall development is usually very poor and insignificant in most of the hydrophytes. Roots may be entirely absent as in Wolffia, Utricularia, Salvinia, and Ceratophyllum, or poorly developed as in Hydrilla. In Salvinia, submerged leaves compensate for roots. However, in emergent forms as in Ranunculus, which grow in mud, roots are well developed with distinct root caps. Root hairs and root caps are generally absent in floating forms. In Eichhornia and Lemna, the root caps are replaced by finger glue-like root pockets which help in balancing. Roots, if present, are generally fibrous, adventitious, reduced in length, unbranched, or poorly branched. In Juicia ripenus, two types of roots develop. Some of them are normal, while others are negatively geotropic floating roots which are spongy in nature and keep the plant afloat. When we look at the system of hydrophytes in submerged forms as in Hydrilla and Potamogeton, it is long, slender, spongy, and flexible. In free-floating forms, it may be slender, floating horizontally on water surface as in Azolla, or thick and short, stoloniferous, and spongy as in Eichhornia. In forms which are rooted with floating leaves like Nymphia and Nilambo, the stem is a rhizome. The rhizome live for many years and produce leaves every year. In Neptunia oleracea, the stems are swollen and store gases to function as floats. When we look at the leaves of hydrophytes, in submerged hydrophytes, they are thin and are either long and ribbon-shaped as in Vallisneria or long and linear as in Potamogeton, finely dissected as in Ceratophyllum and Utricularia. Leaves of floating forms are large, flat, and entire as in Nymphia and Nilambo, with their upper surface coated with wax. The wax coating protects the leaves from mechanical and physical injuries and also prevents clogging of stomata by water. Petioles of floating leaves are long, spongy and flexible and often covered with mucilage. In Eichhornia and Tropa, petioles become swollen and spongy. In some amphibious plants such as Ranunculus and Sagittaria, the leaves show heterophyly, that is, the plants develop two different types of leaves. The submerged leaves are usually dissected or ribbon-shaped, offering little resistance against the water currents and absorbing dissolved carbon dioxide from water. And aerial leaves are entire, rounded or lobed, showing typical mesophytic features. Vegetative propagation is common method of reproduction and takes place by runners, stolons, root tubers, offsets, etc. Flowering and seeds are less common in submerged forms. Pollination and dispersal of fruits and seeds are accomplished by the agency of water. Seeds and fruits of many hydrophytes are light in weight and they easily float on the surface of water. All the submerged parts are surrounded by mucilage which function as lubricant, prevents desiccation and protects plants from epiphytes and attack of pathogens. Anatomical adaptations in hydrophytes. The hydrophytes show following anatomical features. Cuticle is completely absent in submerged parts of the plants, but may be present as a thin film on surface of parts exposed to atmosphere. The epidermis is usually single layer of thin-walled cells, not protective in function. Epidermal cells of leaves contain chloroplasts and they can function as photosynthetic tissue, especially where the leaves and stem are very thin, such as hydrilla. The epidermal cells of submerged parts are mostly covered on outer side by mucilage to protect the plant body from decay under water. Wax coating is present on the upper surface of floating leaves. The aerial parts of some hydrophytes bear hydrothodes to lose excess water that enters into the plant due to endosmosis. Stomata are totally absent in submerged forms and exchange of gas takes place through diffusion. In floating leaves, stomata are confined only to the upper surfaces as in Nelumbo. Non-functional stomata are seen in Potamogeton. In amphibious plants, stomata may be scattered on all the aerial parts. Cortex is well developed, thin-walled and parenchymatous, major portion of which is occupied by well-developed prominent air cavities, the parenchyma, which offers resistance to bending stress, increases buoyancy and allows a rapid gaseous exchange. Mechanical tissues, that is sclerenchyma and collenchyma, are absent or poorly developed in floating and submerged parts. They are, however, present in aerial and terrestrial parts. Branched or star-shaped sclerids and idioblasts are found in the parenchyma of Nymphia, Eichhornia and related plants. It gives mechanical support to the plants. In the vascular tissue, xylem is poorly developed in hydrophytes, especially in submerged forms like Potamogeton, as the water absorption takes place all over the surface of the plant body. In xylem, vessels are less common but tracheids are generally present. In amphibious plants, the xylem and phloem are well developed and are usually aggregated towards the center. Generally, secondary growth in thickness does not occur in aquatic stem and roots. Mesophyll is undifferentiated in submerged leaves as in Potamogeton, but is well differentiated into palisade and spongy parenchyma with air cavities in floating leaves as in Nymphea and emergent leaves as in Typha. Mesophytes. They are such land plants which grow in habitat where water is not scarce or not abundant and need well aerated soils. They prefer soil and air of moderate humidity and avoid soil with standing water or containing a great abundance of salts. They generally lack special structural and physiological adaptations found in hydrophytes and xerophytes. The general morpho-anatomical features of mesophytes are as follows. Root system is well developed. Roots are generally fairly branched with root caps and root hairs. Stems are generally aerial, solid and freely branched. Leaves are generally large, broad, thin and varied in shapes, generally oriented horizontally, green, without hair or waxy coating. Cuticle in aerial parts is moderately developed. Epidermis is well developed without any hair or waxy coating and cells are without chloroplasts. Stomata are generally present on both surfaces of leaves. Mesophyll in leaves is differentiated into palisade and spongy parenchyma with many intercellular space. Vascular and mechanical tissues are fairly developed and well differentiated. Xerophytes. Xerophytes are those plants which grow in xeric habitats, that is under extremely dry conditions. Under such habitats, the conditions are favorable for excessive loss of water from aerial parts of plants, but the water is not available for absorption. Xeric habitats are characterized by high temperature of atmosphere and soil, deficiency of water in the soil or presence of water deep in the soil, high intensity of light and wind velocity. The plants facing such adverse conditions develop certain morphological, anatomical and physiological adaptations. Adaptations in xerophytes are of two types: xeromorphic adaptations and xeroplastic adaptations. Xeromorphic adaptations are those which are inherited whether the xerophyte grows in xeric conditions or not. For example, a cactus plant has the same feature whether it is in a desert or in a normal land. Xeroplastic adaptations are the ones that are induced temporarily but disappear when the conditions are favorable. On the basis of morphology, physiology and life cycle patterns, xerophytes are generally classified into following three categories. Number 1, ephemeral annuals. They are also called drought evaders or drought escapers. They are mostly found in arid zones. They are annuals which complete their life cycle within a very short period of 6 to 8 weeks and thus escape dryness. Generally, they germinate and grow when the habitat remains moist during the short rainy season. They flower and set seeds before the habitat becomes dry. They pass the period of drought by means of their seeds. Examples of such plants are Solanum xanthocarpum, Argemone mexicana, Cassia tora, etc. Number 2, succulents. They are also called drought-enduring xerophytes. These plants suffer from dryness in their external environment only. Their succulent fleshy organs like stem, leaves, and roots serve as water storage organs which accumulate large amount of water during the brief rainy season. In some plants, stem becomes succulent, which are called the fleshy xerophytes, as in Opuntia and Euphorbia. Those succulent xerophytes in which leaves become fleshy are also known as malacophilous xerophytes, such as aloe, yucca, agave, bryophyllum, tradescantia, etc. Number 3. Non-succulent perennials. They are also called drought-resistant xerophytes and are the true xerophytes. They possess a number of morphological, anatomical, and physiological characters which enable them to withstand critical dry conditions. They are the plants that suffer from dryness both in their internal as well as external environments. Examples of such plants are Calotropis procera, Acacia nilotica, Ziziphus jujuba, Capparis apella, Nerium, Saccharum, etc. Morphological adaptations in xerophytes. In contrast to hydrophytes, roots of xerophytes develop under water deficient conditions. Thus, in order to secure water, which is present in less amount and moreover in deeper layers of soil, roots in xerophytes become the principal organ of primary importance. The plants develop extensive and deeply penetrating root system, which in some cases is several times longer than the shoot. Root hairs and root caps are well developed. In some cases, the roots become fleshy and succulent to store large quantity of water and mucilage, for example, asparagus. Some fleshy and succulent xerophytes develop shallow root system to obtain water from light showers as well as dew, for example, Opuntia. The stem in xerophytes remain stunted, thick and heavily branched, giving a bushy appearance. They also develop thick bark to escape transpiration. In some xerophytes, the stem becomes fleshy and succulent, for example, Euphorbia. Sometimes the stem is modified into green, flat, leaf-like structure called phylloclade, covered with spines and perform photosynthesis. The leaves in xerophytes exhibit comparatively more variation than any other part. In many cases, they are either reduced or scale-like modified into spines to check transpiration. In some plants, leaves are permanently oriented in a vertical position to avoid direct sun rays. Some plants shed their leaves during their dry periods to reduce loss of water through stomata. The foliage leaves of some xerophytes are thick, fleshy and leathery. They are the main storing organs. They have shining surface to reflect light and heat and protect plant from desiccation. In some grasses such as Ammophila and Poa, leaves become folded and rolled in such a manner that the sunken stomata become hidden, and thus rate of transpiration is considerably minimized. In some xerophytes, the leaves and young parts of plants are covered over by dense coating of hair which act as shade against sun to reduce transpiration, for example, Calotropis. In some of xerophytes such as Euphorbia, Acacia nilotica, Ziziphus jujuba and Capparis apella, stipules become modified into spines to reduce transpiration. Anatomical modifications in xerophytes. The epidermis of leaves and other delicate parts is covered with thick cuticle. In addition, some xerophytic plants, for example Calotropis, possess protective coating of wax and silica. The wax is impermeable to water vapors, whereas silica protects against solar radiations. Epidermis is multilayered in some xerophytic plants as in Nerium. The epidermal cells of some xerophytes are colored due to the presence of anthocyanin and beta-cyanin in their cell sap. These pigments act as light screen and reduce insolation. The stomata are generally confined to lower epidermis of leaves except some grasses. They are sunken below the level of other epidermal cells. In some cases, they are located in deep pits which are filled with hairs. In some xerophytes, the stomatal pores are plugged with wax or resins during the period of drought. The stomata of mature and old leaves are usually non-functional due to greater thickening. Leaves of some xerophytic grasses possess bulliform or motor cells in their epidermis. These cells are thin-walled and greatly enlarged. These cells are generally present at the base of grooves and furrows in upper epidermis. In moist conditions, these cells remain turgid and keep the leaf surface flat. But when they lose their turgidity in the period of drought, they get flaccid and cause rolling of leaves. In many xerophytes, the hypodermis is 1 to several layers thick, consisting of sclerenchymatous tissue. The mesophyll is differentiated into palisade and spongy parenchyma. In some xerophytes, palisade is located on both upper and lower surface of leaves. The succulent leaves of aloe and salsola have prominent water storage regions in their mesophyll. Mechanical tissue, that is sclerenchyma and collenchyma, is very well developed in xerophytes. The water conducting system, that is xylem, is well developed. It also provides mechanical support. In xylem, the tracheids are smaller in size, whereas vessels are larger with lignified thick walls. Annual rings are also prominent. That is all we have for you in today's lecture. Thank you for watching.